Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. This is our second education hosted, continuing education for the year. We're trying something new this year with continuing ed, and we're offering what we're calling a team spotlight, where we're hearing from staff across departments, across sites, and we're so excited today to have Litzinger Road Ecology Center as our presenters. So Bob Coulter, James Falpel, thank you so much for being with us. This is going to be a fairly informal presentation. We're going to have ample time, volunteers, for you to ask questions at the end and share any feedback or any thoughts with our staff today. So throughout, please feel free to use the chat feature to ask any questions or to share any feedback, and we will relay that to our staff. More people are joining. Wonderful. So at this time, I'm going to ask that we all mute, that everyone mute their microphones. And if you are not sure how to do that, I will do that for you. Again, Bob Coulter, thank you again for being with us. And James, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to you to kick us off. Okay. And volunteers, and we have quite a few staff joining us. Thank you all so much for being with us. Happy St. Patrick's Day. We're so lucky to be together in this virtual space. So thank you for continuing to show up and to be engaged. I hope you enjoy hearing from Litzinger today.
Okay. We good, Andrea?
We're great, Bob. Turning it over to you.
Okay. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to pull up the screen to share with everybody. Litzinger Road Ecology Center, we're part of the garden, but just a little bit of background context. The site is in Ladue off Litzinger Road, no great surprise there. And it operates as a division of the Missouri Botanical Garden, but the site itself is owned by a private foundation, funded by the foundation. But we're all garden staff and part of the larger garden team. Essentially I often say we're kind of on permanent assignment or permanent loan to the center, but fully part of the garden operations and team. And if you live in the neighborhood, if you've driven by, you also would know that we're an MSD construction site. It was kind of sad to put this shot up because it doesn't look like this right now. I have a lot of Project Clear construction going on, but someday it'll restore to this. My goal in the next 15, 20 minutes is to give you an overview of where Litzinger fits in the overall ecology of the garden's programs. Then we have some time for discussion. Second part, James is going to share more of the grounds management, restoration, and research projects underway, with the hope that over the next hour or so, you get a pretty good understanding of what's often one of the garden's hidden places. Because one of the challenges of Litzinger is that we operate under a special use permit from the city of Ladue, which doesn't let us be open to the public, unlike the other garden facilities that you're probably more familiar with, where you can pop by on a Saturday and go for a walk, engage in a program or something. Everything we do is pre-structured around longer term partnerships, and not the casual visitor or single field trip model that much of the other garden programs are set up on. And that all works out well. Our intention for years has been not to have the same things in all of the different garden locations, but to think more about the overall ecology, if you will, of what the garden's total offerings and engagements with the community are. So with that context, first part, I'm going to talk through kind of why we do what we do, and then some different examples. And we do a lot of kid and school programs. We also have a number of programs for adults and for graduate students and the like that we'll get to later in our time together. So with that, let's see if everything's behaving here. Big picture, I like to think about what we do as, why do we get up, staff, term I often use with the staff, why do we get up in the morning? And I think a big part of it is this idea that John Dewey put forward about what our effect is on enlarging and improving people's experience with the world. What value do we serve in the community? And I think a lot of it is in different ways that I'll be talking about in the next little bit. How do we enlarge and improve people's experience? This picture here, Dylan, the kid we worked with for a number of years, great kid, but I use it as an iconic picture of Litzinger because you can see that, like many suburban kids, he's literally wrapped in corporate media. And somewhere in what he was doing with us you can see just by tracking his eyes, something small but intriguing has grabbed his attention and shifted his perspective a bit. And that's, again, kind of, to me, it's iconic of what we're doing in terms of engaging people with the natural world and building a mindset around conservation and all the major garden ideals. But experience, to think about that for a minute, again, continuing in a John Dewey sort of way, it's not just what you do, but Dewey would argue, and I would support, it's not the doing, but what impact does that have? What opportunities do you have to process what you're doing, integrate it into what you've done before, integrate into your identity as a person? So again, it's not just activity, this mania, and it's not cramming down a bunch of facts. Left to themselves, schools will just keep loading kids, load them, test them. And eventually you get an expression like this, where a kid just reaches cognitive overload, the brain melts down, and they're lost. But again, really promoting the kind of experience that promotes reflection, promotes identity development is really part of the garden's broader mission. And what I'm sharing this morning is one particular flavor of how Litzinger supports that broader garden mission. So as we're doing experience, you saw some kids doing some planting on the grounds at Litzinger. Even better, we support a number of planting projects at schools out in the community. So they take the things they learn at Litzinger and go back and do positive things in their school ground and in the community. So you gain experience, and over time that leads to growth, or what Dewey would call opportunities to better manage future experience. So you see a lot of growth happening in this picture. You have the girl with the glue gaining control over how her body responds to what she wants, how she's working with what she wants, integrating what an adult can help her do. The boy off on the left of the picture, keeping an eye on what his classmate is doing, maybe getting some ideas he might want to build into his project. So a lot of good growth there, which again is thought of as how do you better manage that experience? And that goes back to what kind of environment promotes that, what encourages it. A lot of good field experience, being outdoors is part of it. Just some markers of what makes a good experience to promote growth. We've had whoops, where did I lose my slides here? There we go. We've had a partnership with MIT for about 15 years now. And one branch of that is a group at MIT that, led by Mitch Resnick, part of their media lab, that promotes the idea of lifelong kindergarten, that ideas of kindergarten can carry forward through the rest of our lives. As he would argue, projects, passion, peers, and play should be part of our identity throughout our lives. He leads a very well-funded graduate program. Essentially, you can get a PhD in kindergarten from MIT, which gives us some value of where kindergarten has value throughout the lifespan. Companies invest big time in his lab because of the innovation that projects, passion, peers, and play facilitate in his graduate students. And we've co-opted that with the idea that those are some markers of what makes a good learning experience. So again, experience, growth, building habits. How do we approach things in the world? Mary Pat, one of our volunteers leading these kids, think about the habits that are shown there. Close observation, How do I, as a learner, how do I integrate close observation with use of the print materials? You can see the field guides, laminated field guides in the kids' hands, the field equipment surrounding them. You know, it's not science as a textbook. It's not a set of things to memorize and spit back, but these habits of how do you engage with the world? How do you come to know? How do you refine your knowledge? All good pieces of the puzzle. Last marker here, so these are some of the habits that we're trying to promote. I wouldn't say these are the holy 8 by any means, but just meant as indicators. Again, not of just the stuff you have to learn to cover your science curriculum, but these lifelong pursuits, that being good at reflecting, organizing, being curious, what you pay attention to, and so on. Ongoing threads that, particularly since we work with most of the teachers and with others on a long-term partnership, we can really pay attention to scaffolding throughout their time with us and as they continue with their other ventures. Last piece of this is around an idea of citizenship, which we take seriously as more than just being good, doing a litter pickup kind of thing, but really supporting schools and others in a broader view of citizenship. The picture that you have there is a project that we supported with St. Michael's of Clayton School on Wydown in Clayton. They have a year-long theme every year. A couple years ago, that theme was around homes. The kids designed and built bee homes as part of that year-long theme. Excuse me. They very kindly donated 3 of their homes to Litzinger, and that was all very appreciated. But we challenged them to go further on that. And so they all came out to Litzinger, spread out across the site in very small groups, identified possible locations. What would be a good place for that bee home? You know, they've been studying this for a while. They know what makes up a good location for a bee home. But then they went around and had to decide as a class, okay, we have 3 homes that we're donating. Which of all of these possibilities are the best options among that? You know, and you think about that from a citizenship perspective, how do you advocate for what you believe? How do you take in what others are suggesting? How do you come to an amicable solution? Watching the news the last few months, those are not bad things for people to be learning. And so, again, we take the citizenship piece very important as a way to carry out the garden's mission in the community. So pull all that together, experiences, the doing and reflecting, growing to better direct your future experience, how you approach experience through better habits, and building good citizenship. All good things that happen when you engage with the garden. So that's good stuff. That's why we get up in the morning. One last quote here, another Dewey quote, that power as well as interest comes by use and practice. Okay, that's good. I know we want to do that. The picture there, Molly Patterson was a kid who was in a camp that we did with the U City schools. We had an NSF grant, National Science Foundation grant, to work with them for a few years. And so we took the kids around different parts of U City. They explored some of the opportunities. We framed it as, okay, in 25 years, you're going to have kids, you're going to live here. These are all U City school kids. You're going to live here. What do you know about your community? What could you do to make the community better? And one of the things they found was some of the socioeconomic gaps and ecological differences in the community across U City. That was kind of the focus of the camp. Molly stuck with it, and this, echoing back to the quote that I put there, Molly stuck with it, really investigated some of those differences that she saw in the city. And the following summer, she was invited by Esri, a major software company, to go to San Diego and present her research in front of 12,000 geospatial information professionals. So it's kind of cool. You graduate from 6th grade, you fly to San Diego and speak in front of 12,000 people, which is kind of, granted it's outlying data, but it's a nice illustration of what you can do with use and practice. So that's kind of the why we do what we do. I hope the pictures gave you some snippets of what we do with school programs. But the overall Litzinger portfolio is much broader than just the school programs. And so how do we take these ideals and move them beyond just the school programs. So we'll picture there, Ozzy's got his map. How does that map jut forward into adulthood? One piece of it is our work with teachers. We don't have any preset programs that teachers can sign up for. Rather, they're developed in partnership with the Litzinger staff and with the teachers to really reflect what those kids are up for, what kind of time that they can invest in a project. And they develop into sustained partnerships where we'll work with them on site at Litzinger a few times a year. We'll go out and work with them at the school site, really wrapped around what they're interested in. Two staff have full-time responsibilities for school partnerships. I've held a small portfolio of schools. So just as an example, I was working a couple years ago with Kaiser Elementary over in Kirkwood. The kids were frustrated that parts of their playground were pretty soggy after a rain. And so we worked with them to learn about native plants, plants that will really absorb water. And they pulled together the ideas and resources. They went over and talked with the neighbors, get them to buy into the project. They even convinced the district to bring in the trucks and take out some of the concrete so they could put in native plants. But all of that goes back to really strategic planning with the teachers. Obviously, this is a pre-COVID picture. I don't think that we could pull this off this summer with that kind of close proximity, but that's the ideal of really working carefully with the teachers to create experiences. But that builds the teacher's own comfort with nature, their own awareness of the possibilities. Beyond teachers, volunteers. We deeply appreciate what volunteers do in terms of contributing support to the programs, but we really want to be intentional about supporting your growth as a citizen as well. Opportunities to serve, build your own identity as a volunteer educator, chances to share your interest. Bob Virag, the gentleman in the middle of the picture there, he is all over stream quality in St. Louis. If it has to do with water in St. Louis, he is an expert on it. And this is a chance for him to build his own identity in the community and his own built based on his interests. And a great model for the kids of people who develop these interests and share them, not because it's their job, not because they have to, but that's who their identity is. And you all are great role models for that, for the kids we serve. But more to the point of this slide, really being intentional about supporting your identity as a citizen and appreciating your contributions. So teachers, volunteers, the partnership we've had with MIT, developing technology resources that really support engaging kids with nature. One of the challenges is that ecology can be pretty slow on a kid's time frame to see how things play out over time. And so we just finished up a National Science Foundation grant to develop modeling tools that help kids link their firsthand experience with how does this play out over time, or these things I hear about, how does it play out over time? The model you're looking at, Alex on the right, Amarek on the left, they're exploring a model where trying to figure out what's the right amount of public transportation. You hear, don't everybody drive, take public transit. But if you send a bunch of empty buses around, that's actually more pollution than cars. As we were developing the model, we came across some research that says a bus pollutes about 7 times more than a car. So it gave us an algorithm to work with. And so we set the kids up in that imaginary community you're seeing on the screen to model, what's the right number of buses to really help with air pollution, and kids working together, share ideas, share perspectives, all good science learning that came out of our partnership with MIT. Graduate research, the garden partners with Miami University of Ohio in the Advanced Inquiry Program. You can get a graduate degree, a master's in biology from Miami in partnership with the work you do through the garden. Get 21 credits with us, another 14 in online classes with Miami. and get a master's degree. The picture you have there is some of our Miami AIP students working in the climatron with Monica Carlson, learning about how to preserve plant specimens, extending the graduate students' experience of science by doing real science, integrating it into what they already know about science, and looking forward to building what's their identity as they pursue the rest of their graduate program and move into new roles in the community. Another piece of the graduate student work, James, who you'll be hearing from in a few minutes, has really built up a very strong research partnership with a number of universities in the St. Louis region, mix of things from offering a field site for classes. I know we have a SLU class coming out in May. Other universities have had students come out in classes. But also mini grants to support student research. When you're a graduate student, kicking $1,000, $1,500 your way to support a research project can make all the difference in building your identity as a practicing scientist. So we're pleased to support them both in the technical expertise, but support feeding resources into making their research possible. And that's starting to build up a nice bank of research that is feeding our understanding of the site and contributing to second and third iterations of studies around different topics. So between these graduate programs and the Miami Advanced Inquiry Program, we're pleased and proud to be able to support graduate research in the area and, again, building identities for different people as they move forward through the lifespan. All this goes back, just to tie it together, it all goes back to, what are the rights and responsibilities people take on? How do we support them exercising agency? Go back to Dylan, wrapped in corporate media, or are you engaged with nature, being part of making the community better? And the last part I highlighted in blue there, acting to build value in their lives, whether you're 5 or 25, 50, 7, whatever. Working in partnership with the community to help them build value in their lives and build a better world for us to live in. All comes together. Very last idea, I promise you, these are some kids we worked with in a summer program. They're doing a container garden right down the street from the main campus, building up container gardens in a reclaimed lot that used to be a gas station years ago. But giving them an early start on the same ideas. Bildung is a German term that captures something that is really central to what we're trying to do. Originally, it was around personal development, broader than just get a good job, who you are as a citizen, as a community member. But there's some recent development around that. Again, more European, but we're trying to bring it this way. Not just who you are, but anchoring yourself, your identity in what this quote has around ecological and social interdependence, which is so critical to the garden's mission and broader considerations of citizenship, that it's not just about me developing, but how do I support the ecology of my community? How do I support the social fabric of the community? And so for a few years, we've been anchoring a number of our programs around this concept, implicitly or explicitly, of Bildung, this German term that we're bringing to the garden through this. So kids doing a container garden project. I stole this for a closing quote from a murder mystery of all places. I'm happy to suck up information anywhere. And it's only grown-ups who want children to be children. Children themselves always want to be real people. And I would argue that's true even when they stop being kids, that, being real people, being a contributing member of the community. And so what I've shared with you today is just one view of what one part of the garden does toward that broader mission that the garden takes on of enlarging and improving people's experience. So I think that gets us, oh, sorry, one more slide. Just a great closing picture there. Elliott Chapel, 6th grade youth group, they wanted to make a contribution to the community. They looked at possibilities on the church grounds, settled on a native plant garden. And it was another instance of what David Hansen would call this, building this inner urge to serve and the practical intelligence to bring it to life. They learned about native plants, they designed a garden, and this was obviously installation day. And a whole bunch of kids, a whole bunch of shovels, and nobody got hurt. So that was a good day. So with that, I'll wrap up and happy to engage questions. Andrea, you want to?
Yes, Bob, thank you so much for sharing the creative and powerful why of Litzinger. We did have a good question come in about how did the partnership with MIT come about? And a follow-up with that is just expanding on partnerships with local universities.
Sure. The MIT one is one that, you could look at all the literature on part of it, it never would come to pass. We had the first National Science Foundation grant that we got back in 2006. One of the terms of the grant was that we had to have a nonprofit partner. That was us. We were the lead on the project. We had a partner school district, the U City Schools. We had to have a business partner, Esri, Environmental Systems Research Institute, the GIS company that Molly was doing a presentation with. Last part was we needed a university. So we had WashU, that's very normal. The faculty that we were partnering with left WashU, and to keep the grant, I needed a university. And coincidentally, I was up in Boston, saw that a friend I used to work with, I used to live up there, he had just started at MIT. And so, yeah, fine, I'll be up there. Can we talk? We had lunch, we talked, and I just happened to raise this. I need to find a university to park the rest of this grant in. Oh, you should talk with Eric Klopfer, who runs their teacher program. It was just a total coincidental thing of a lunch meeting that happened to hit right at that time. We couldn't recreate it if we tried. But since then, we've had 4 subsequent National Science Foundation grants. It's brought in about $6 million of federal investment to improve science in the St. Louis area. And it all came together out of just a casual lunch conversation with a former colleague from when I used to live up in the Boston, Cambridge area. He hooked us up with the director of the education program that he was part of at MIT, and the rest is history. James can talk more about the research partnerships with the universities around the ecological research piece and such. We don't have really big partnerships with the teacher prep programs because they tend to be very locked down. Most of them are teacher certification programs where they're basically pre-scripted throughout the entire program, wrapped around being in schools, doing classroom-based stuff. And so we don't really have an entree into that. We've had occasional education interns, but because most of them are in teacher prep programs, that piece just, there isn't a lot of room there. But I'll leave it to James because he'll be talking more about his partnerships around research and restoration, if that's okay.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, that's perfectly okay. Yeah. And I think this is a good segue to move over to James. And volunteers, staff, if you have any questions for Bob, thank you again for sharing all of this. Please feel free to put these in the chat, and we will still have some time. Yeah, we should have some time at the end. Here.
Yeah, and I will put my contact in the chat if anybody wants to follow up with me.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
James, thank you for being with us. Welcome.
Hello. Yeah, and I guess I'll talk about it a little bit in the presentation about the university piece. But I just want to say, I guess too, that, yeah, like what Bob was saying, that, most of their programming is, pre-scripted, planned ahead of time. So the interaction with trying to adjust their programming, it just wouldn't be worth the time and effort really to try and kind of work with them on that scale. But giving them this gem of a place in St. Louis to be able to come and have their students interact with our staff and volunteers and interns, and be able to learn from them, and the information that they gain from doing research here on site has just been invaluable. And so I'm really glad that Bob gave me the opportunity to kind of make that a part of my job, because with having the restoration be my focus, I'm then able to communicate what we're doing on site very well to these folks who can then come and do research here. Otherwise, somebody without having that kind of background, it'd probably be a little bit harder to really communicate that to a lot of these professors. But yeah, we've been luckily building up quite a community ranging from WashU, SLU, Webster, Maryville, UMSL, all the big schools around here. So that's been really nice. And also just to what Bob says about how useful this programming is for students, young influential minds. I was influenced by similar programming out at Shaw Nature Reserve when I was a kid, and going out there and getting to interact with their staff. And it was a big influence on me growing up, and just kind of understanding, because growing up in a more urban area and then going out to a place like that and seeing all those interactions with nature, it really did influence me in my career path. So it does work. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here.
And James, while you're pulling this up, we did have a question come in the chat that Bob answered. So I'm just sharing for the recording. How many staff at Litzinger? So when we're fully staffed, 9 permanent and a few paid interns. So thanks for these questions.
Yeah. Did it pop up on your guys' screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Looks good.
All right. Alrighty, so why is it not clicking forward? There we go. And just a little bit of background on the site itself for any of you who might not be familiar. This is an aerial view of what Litzinger used to look like, and I'll get more into that a little bit towards the end. But can you see my cursor as well, Andrea? Okay. So here's the main entrance to the property with one of our 3 prairies on site. These are reconstructed prairies. This one here is what we refer to as the Pasture Prairie, and it is right next to the classroom areas for the education staff. And so on most trips, when students come out, this is the area that they'll be coming in and gathering in. And these prairies have been here since about 1989 is when reconstruction started on property. Prior to that, these 2 prairies here were agricultural fields, and this prairie here was a horse pasture. We also have a very urban creek, a very dynamic creek, Deer Creek, that floods quite regularly from just the smallest rainstorm. And you can see here on this map, just the path through here and our wooded areas through here. And just like most of urban St. Louis, full of invasive species that just pop into here from horticultural introductions like bush honeysuckle and winter creeper, things like that. And so there's been a lot of effort into removing those throughout the years since the site was started in the 90s. And so this is what a typical shot from our prairie during the summer looks like, looking back up at our restoration offices up here, up the hill. And these are bottomland floodplain prairies. So they will get inundated. And so these species of plants really like a lot of moisture and can get to be pretty big. And for little kids coming out into here, it's probably a lot different than what we as adults see in this situation. It probably looks a little bit more jungle-like for them. But that gives them a real eye-level view of all the wildlife interactions happening with these plants. And a big part of the restoration programming happening here is in due in part to our volunteers. We would not be able to do all the work that we do here on site without all of our volunteers. When it comes to the prairies themselves, it's a lot of seed collecting and cleaning those seeds and using for restoration in other areas of the property, or for growing plants, as Bob had mentioned, for schools. So they're out there collecting those seeds, cleaning them, stratifying them over winter, and then working with our horticulturist who had been Mary in previous years, and she just retired this winter, but potting those up in the springtime for schools and growing those on. So a big piece in the plant production here on site. And then, like I said, when it comes to our woodlands full of invasive species, this is one of the areas on the other side of Deer Creek. And this is bush honeysuckle, and it's really hard to see the winter creeper down there underneath it, but it is there. But this is what a typical path would look like through all the bush honeysuckle. It just suppresses out all the native plants that would have been growing there. And, you know, it's just not useful habitat for wildlife. And our volunteers coming out every week, helping us hack away at the invasive species in different ways, removing bush honeysuckle, removing winter creeper, Japanese hops in the creeks, all things like that. And once we remove all those invasive species, we have to go back in with native plant material in a lot of cases because they've just been completely outcompeted to where there's no seed there available, or because of the creek potentially, you know, washing away seed, things like that. So our volunteers are collecting that seed and sowing the seed out for restoration areas, or physically planting some of the plants that were grown on. So again, we wouldn't be able to do the programming here from the outdoor educational standpoint without these volunteers doing the restoration work as well. And a big part of that is that upkeep and maintenance of staying on top of invasive species, and that big part of that is burning every season. So we will be burning various areas. We rotate the areas that we burn, so there's always refuge for wildlife. And so it's always a big fun moment for volunteers on burn day each year. This year, of course, with COVID, we had some of our education staff come in and help from the main campus, as Andrea can probably comment on how what a fun time that was. But yeah, typically it's our volunteers assisting in that capacity. So it's usually an all hands on deck kind of thing. And what we get from all that work is, of course, rewarded with beautiful natural habitat that is very functional for wildlife. And so on top of that, again, I was talking about working with local researchers, you know, trying to see the importance, the value of all these plants that, you know, and all this work that's been done. We've been working with a lot of universities here in town that are focusing on pollinators, because that's just a real big interest of mine. If you care about native plants, then you should be concerned about how they are reproducing and able to keep on going, because pollinators are also a big part of our lives in helping us with our food crops and such. And so just sustaining, you know, they are integral in sustaining native habitats long term. So we need to make sure that we're keeping pollinators and healthy habitats for them. So been working with a lot of researchers focusing on that. It's a pretty hot topic. Also working with other organizations in St. Louis, from the St. Louis Zoo to the World Bird Sanctuary, as you'd see here, Colleen Crank, who is a researcher from World Bird Sanctuary and was also a volunteer for us. But in these times, she's just doing work on research through World Bird Sanctuary. But she's been doing a lot of monitoring of the different birds here on site, and also doing mist netting. But our volunteers would also help us with a lot of our monitoring here on site. So they were working with Colleen to do some of the bird surveys here on site. And everything from just doing these visual bird surveys to monitoring bird boxes that we have put out for them, to also bird banding. So she actually puts up mist nets and captures the birds in the nets, records their information, all kinds of detailed information, bands them with a federal ID band, so other people can track them should they find this bird. As you can see there on that right leg there. And then they're released, and we actually quite often see some of these banded birds at like our bird feeders, or sometimes they actually get recaptured in a mist net in a future year. So then we actually get to see how much they've been growing throughout the years, things like that. So it's a pretty interesting. And a big part of that too is also seeing some of the birds that are really hard to catch on like visual or audible surveys, is by getting some of these migrants that come through and use our property through these mist nets. So it's really good information that comes out of this research. And like I said too, we've been partnering with the St. Louis Zoo just here recently with frog monitoring. So doing the what is the name of the program? The Spring Peeper program through the St. Louis Zoo. So they're actually doing audio monitoring of some of the seasonal pools that we have here on site to see what kind of frogs are here. And this is a shot of one of our interns working with one of our researchers as well. This is Scott George, a soil scientist here in St. Louis, and he's doing soil samples out ahead of that project that I'll be talking about here very shortly. So these interactions are just so integral. So not only are our volunteers getting to interact with the researchers, but our interns are, and then sometimes just our visitors, if a class is coming through and the researchers are here on site, but then also making this information available in the end as well. Our staff also conducts weekly phenology walks and stream team monitoring of the creek. And our interns get to interact with this, and volunteers too, if they're available. And again, just trying to really get as much information out of all this restoration work that's been done here, just so we really understand what's happening and make sure St. Louis kind of understands and values this work as well. And so I've been talking a lot about Deer Creek throughout this. It is a very volatile urban creek that runs through our property, about a little over a half-mile stretch because of its meanders through our property. But because of the watershed around us, the creek floods at a very small amount of rainfall. And that's due to all the urbanization around us, from blacktop, concrete, all these impervious surfaces and turf lawns. A lot of this suburbanized area here is turf lawns, and a lot of people think that's very pervious, but it is unfortunately not. Very little water actually gets through your turf grass. Most of it will shed off, and it just causes this rise to happen. But our prairies and woodlands are great sponges for rainfall, and so just trying to, keep this kind of habitat around and also influence others in trying to do the same kind of habitat is only going to help our watersheds in the long run. Here's another shot of it at a lower setting, and you can kind of see some of the restoration work we had done back when this photo was taken. On the right-hand side, you can see a lot of the bush honeysuckle has been cleared, but there on the left-hand side, on that side of the creek, it had not. So it's just a good before and after kind of shot to really show you what's happening here. And just having a full woodland full of bush honeysuckle, you may think, oh, well, that's probably a good sponge for soaking up water. I mean, it is plants at least. Well, unfortunately, it's not when it's having, just this one kind of canopy layer. You want to have multiple, different stories of canopy to kind of catch that rainfall in a diversity of plants with different root depths, things like that, being able to, kind of make that soil very pervious. So just having one shallow rooted understory shrub across the board is actually very bad for our watersheds. And like you can see here, it just ends up becoming a big murky mess from the runoff of these areas. And I just threw this shot in there as well, just to kind of show you some of the other unfortunate side effects of being in an urbanized area. You can see all that oil sheen in the creek that can sometimes happen from different types of wash off. And road salt's a big problem that a former employee here has been studying a lot, also in our urbanized areas that we cause to these creeks. And so, why is the restoration work we do here that important? And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're using native plants. These native plants are food for just the beginning of the food web. Shown here in this picture is a spice bush, one of our native boundland shrubs here on site. And this is a little spice bush caterpillar. And it's relies on basically two plants to be able to survive. It can only eat spice bush or sassafras, another native tree that we have around here. And so if you don't have those plants that it specializes on, you will not be able to have this caterpillar or this adult butterfly that you see here in front of us. And so 90% of insects or herbivorous insects are specialists. So they are really needing to be able to, have these plants to be able to survive. So most insects have some kind of relationship with some type of plant. And so the ones here that evolved along native plants here in North America, they're of course going to be native plants that they're needing. And then, of course, like I said, this is just the beginning of the food web. From there, birds and other higher life forms are going to rely on these insects to be able to survive and to feed their young, to raise them up. And just a whole variety of caterpillars can be found here on site, especially when you are looking at shrubs and trees. It's a lot easier to find them. And not just the plant's leaves are important, but the plants themselves will be important for the food chain, from the insects eating their wood, and then the things looking for those grubs of those insects, to the trees themselves just being habitat in the sense of nesting and perching areas for even higher life forms. So everything is relying on the beginning of the food web, from the soil to the water quality to those native plants. That's what we really have to focus on. And it's kind of a, if you build it, they will come kind of idea. Because it truly is, if you have the food, they will come. And this is just another instance of how the plants can be habitat even after they have died. So underneath these layers of bark and underneath like big leaves, things like that, is important habitat for bats. And you can imagine that this tree here, it probably wouldn't even be that long of a time period that it's that great of habitat for bats. I mean, that's probably only going to be a year or two that you're going to have bark kind of flaking off like that. But how long did it take for us to even get that tree? It took years for a big tree like that to grow, and then for something to die, happen to it to die, and then it's now habitat for this important life form. Same goes for any of these insects that are now using these snags for homes as well. So, and something else would have created that hole, and then something like this little mason bee here is now checking out the holes as a home option for it, for a nest site. She's hoping that this little woodpecker hole or little beetle hole there is its next new home. And then, of course, when the trees come down, they're still important habitat. So trying to leave these logs and snags, if we can, is incredibly, incredibly important. Things like beetles and the things that'll be eating the beetles, like those skinks you just saw, it's just all incredibly important. And just as a whole, the bigger areas that you have are, of course, going to be more suitable habitat for more things, because something like this, like the turkey, is going to need a wider range to be able to wander around. So if you just have a suburban lawn that you've put in native plants into, you're probably not going to get turkeys to come back, right? But so it's just convincing multiple people on large scales to try and do this kind of habitat restoration is how we can start really improving our area and making it more quality habitat for wildlife. And the creeks themselves are incredibly important. So really thinking about the water quality we have here on site and in our area is just highly important, especially if, if you like birds and you're a birder, look out looking for these special types of birds. They're relying on the things living in that water and relying on the water quality. Even if you think that the birds themselves might be able to survive in the water, they're looking for food, and that's what they need. And of course, many other things living in that water. And so that was the end of the story, right? No, not for us here. The restoration is getting a little bit tougher for the future. This is the North Prairie that I was showing you earlier. This is what it was looking like this last summer. There was some construction happening. And volunteers played a big part of the work going out ahead of this construction project. And what it is it's a half-mile stretch of our property. I'll just go back to this slide so it makes a little bit more sense. It was a half-mile stretch of our property, about 85 feet wide at the smallest areas. Sometimes it was a lot wider in some of the stream bank stabilization areas. But it is the sewer district's Project Clear project, which is coming from the wastewater being removed from our urban creeks here in St. Louis. And so it's a good project in the end. Ultimately, it's going to help out our urban creeks from having that kind of pollution being put into it from our sewage systems. But in the short term, it has damaged a lot of habitat. Like I said, a half-mile stretch, 85 feet wide of our whole property. And it, of course, went through our North Prairie, and it just happened to go through one of the highest quality spots in the prairie where one of the probably the nicest plants that we had on site lived. But our volunteers really helped us out with this one. This is Melanthium virginicum, or actually it's now like veratrum, I believe, or I could be messing that up even, but it's a Virginia bunch flower is the common name on that. And it is a exquisite looking plant in the lily family. And yeah, it's a very sensitive plant. It's kind of like what we call a Goldilocks plant. It doesn't like it too wet, doesn't like it too dry. It likes it just right. And so it found one spot in the prairie that it was very happy and colonized. And of course, that's where the Project Clear was going through. And so our volunteers got out there in the fall of 2019 and helped us transplant a whole lot of plants into other areas of the prairie. And we got to see last year that they did take quite well after we got back from our pandemic leave. So also out ahead of the Project Clear project, the volunteers helped us inventory all the trees within the path that were going to get removed. This was, of course, from what I was explaining, very important to our habitat, these trees, incredibly invaluable, especially with time, how much time has gone into the growth of these trees. And so our army of volunteers got out there and got all these trees measured and counted and got down to species on the trees. And these trees, numbering over about 750 trees were removed. About 250 were the canopy layer of trees. So like the really large sizable trees that, we probably won't see again in our lifetime once replanted, those were removed. And we were able to use the U.S. Forest Service's iTree database to find out all kinds of information on these trees. to see, what they're valued at, the pollution that they were removing, the carbon sequestration, those kinds of things. But the number, the replacement value number that the Forest Service gave us was about $500,000 in replacement value. So it just goes to show that not just what kind of value these have to wildlife, but the value to us, just having to try and think about replacing these trees, and we just won't be seeing that kind of habitat again in our life. It'll be restored in as a more grassland prairie habitat at first, and then slowly kind of worked into an open woodland savanna-like setting. But these are some good aerials that Cassidy at the main garden took for us with his drone. This is an aerial. If you look down here in the left-hand corner here, this is the classroom areas and that driveway coming around. So just kind of keep your eye on that for this next shot, and you'll see the transition here. So this is that classroom again in that driveway. This was about 2/3 of the way. This is before they had actually cut through and gone into the prairie itself over here. So this is as they worked down and through here, and I'll go back just a little bit so you can kind of see it again. But yeah, so a lot of habitat disturbance. And so we got a lot of work out ahead of ourselves. And here's the full on. So it was winter time by the time they got all the way through. So here's the aerial from that. So you can see the full amount of removal. And so it's a big disturbance area, and it's going to be a unique challenge planting back into this. And so we will have a lot of work out ahead of us, and a lot of work out ahead for volunteers as well. So here's another good shot of that. And here, Google Earth updated their images here recently, and so I was able to add this to my presentation, so you can really see a before and after shot of right before construction started happening in October of 2018 and to present day here. I should say 2019 is October of 2019 is when they started, but this was the best aerial I could get that looked very good side by side here. Yeah, and that is it for what I have in my presentation. But again, it's going to be a lot of work out ahead of us, and we can't wait to get our volunteers back on site and start working on this stuff and the planning out ahead for this.
James, thank you so much for all this information, for the beautiful images.
Yeah.
Martha Sherman put in, and I'd like for you to speak to this because I know you're a big part of this. She's representing the YouTube channel that Litzinger has for more information on research and enrichments. Would you like to say something about that?
Can I share my screen again?
Yes, of course, of course. And volunteers, I know it's noon. I know it's time. If you have to go, if you have lunch plans, go ahead. We are recording this, but yes, James, please.
All right, let's see here. I don't know why it's blocking that. There we go.
Yes.
I had it pulled up in a tab just to show, and I know sometimes Zoom is not the greatest with video, so bear with me on this, but it's just a minute-long trailer that we have on our website for our videos. But we've been doing, since the pandemic started, we've been doing a lot of video outreach for our volunteers. And of course, this is, more than welcome for any, this is all public video, but this is just furthering education for volunteers of Litzinger was our main target. But know all of you volunteers at the main campus too, just, feel free to watch these videos. These are for you as well. So, but this is the trailer of our YouTube channel.
That is amazing. I'm so glad we did not miss that. So thank you, Martha, for putting that in the chat.
Yes, thank
James,
you.
thank
Thank
you
you
for
for
sharing
reminding me,
that
Martha.
teaser. Yes, yes. James, maybe we can let's you and I connect, and maybe we can start sharing some of these in the Vine newsletter for education volunteers.
Oh, definitely.
That is great. Okay, James, Bob, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. There's been Mary Lee mentioned both the restoration projects and the research connection information are very interesting. You shared a lot of wonderful information with us today. Thank you so much. Volunteers, last call. If there's any last minute questions, we have time for maybe one question, even though we're over time. And if you want to ponder your questions, we can, Bob shared his contact information.
Oh yeah, let me put mine in there.
And James, oh yeah, great.
And Andrea, can
Yes.
I ask?
Yes.
We've got
Martha,
a couple of our volunteers on this call that are scheduled to come out for the Explore LREC, and I just wanted to see if they were still wanting to come out with the rain that we're having, so they can just let me know.
Yes. So Litzinger volunteers, if you're on here, connect with Martha regarding your whereabouts and the weather. Is that fair? Whereabouts.
Yes.
And if you're on here and you don't know what Martha is saying, it's okay. It's okay. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing.